Today, we're going to talk about Carpe Diem and a bunch of social psychology research relating to Carpe Diem. What does Carpe Diem mean? Seize the day. In what language? Exactly. Do any of you learn Latin still? Anybody still learn Latin? 3 of you. Okay, all right. And the rest of you are mumbling, what is Latin? What is it? Okay, so a lot of social psychology, I don't know Latin either, so don't feel any shit. A lot of social psychology research converges on relevance to this concept of seizing the day, of Carpe Diem. And probably, this is some of my favorite research in social psychology because a lot of it talks about how the things that hold you back from really doing the things that would make you happy in life are illusions or delusions. So enemy number 1 of Carpe Diem in social psychology research is self-consciousness. And I'm going to review some research today that suggests that self-consciousness is primarily a product of various perceptual and judgmental illusions. For example, the spotlight effect, the illusion of transparency, and the tendency to expect excessively harsh criticisms from other people for one's missteps and foibles. And I'm going to try and kind of go through these pretty quickly so we can wrap this one up in like 20 minutes. Because, we don't want to talk about seizing the day forever, right? I mean, that would kind of undermine the point. Okay, so the illusion of transparency. By the way, whenever I have these concepts and they have definitions tied to them, you know that there's this high probability they might wind up on a test. This would be an example of that. So the illusion of transparency is the tendency for people to overestimate how much other people can see their internal states. And this is one form of self-consciousness, right? This is something that, I don't know if you experience this, but as I walk around in my everyday life, I kind of get the sense that people know what I'm thinking, or if I have fears or concerns or things that haunt me, I feel like somehow people know about it, Or if you feel awkward or nervous in some social setting, then maybe everybody knows, and everybody's kind of studying you and saying, oh yeah, that guy, he looks really nervous. And that's my everyday life. It's pretty much looking around at people they're thinking I'm real nervous. So Tom Gilovich, who's a social psychologist at Cornell University, decided to do some research on this tendency, the illusion of transparency. And what he did a bunch of studies on this in this paper that came out in 1998. But one of the studies, I thought, did a good job of just exemplifying this illusion really well. He got a bunch of participants together, like 3 or 4 at a time or something, had them sit around a table, and then had them play a truth or lie-telling game, where they would make up a list of like 4 truths and 1 lie. It was like a truth or dare-ish kind of setting, more interesting than your average lab experiment. And so it was rigged so that they told lies 20% of the time. They were told, 1 in 5 of your statements should be a lie about yourself, and then 4 out of 5 should be true. And then they had the people that sat at the table, hear these statements and then try to guess which ones are lies and which ones are truths. Sort of like a truth or dare type situation. Could be a fun game to play. So people were decently good. They weren't very good. They weren't very good at guessing when people were lying or not. People were lying 20% of the time. People only guessed it right about 26% of the time. So people's ability to guess which one of your 5 statements was a lie was only marginally better than chance, say 6% better. But when they asked the people, what do you think is going to be the rate at which people will guess which statements are true or lies, people who told these lies and truths guessed that they would be detected 49% of the time. So they thought that people could see through them, see into their internal states, and see what they were really thinking at a pretty high rate, much, much higher rate than was actually the case. And Gilovich and colleagues go on to try to explain, why is this? Why is it that we think that our minds and our hearts are wide open to the people around us and they can see right through us? Why do we think this? And they came to the conclusion, and they have good research supporting this, that what happens is a dynamic of anchor and adjustment. That you tend to anchor on your own self-knowledge about, say, which one of these statements is a lie or a truth, or your self-knowledge that you're nervous in some social setting, for example, and then you insufficiently adjust to take into account other people's perspective. So we've talked about this before, anchor and adjustment models of cognition, that you have some kind of first thought that you anchor on, and then you take into account other information and adjust, and you end up getting a more accurate or realistic answer, or seeing things more accurately or realistically, but you tend to not adjust enough, and it also tends to be effortful. And so the conclusion is, if you were tired and you were low in effort, psychological resources, then you might do this effect even more. But this is the reason that people tend to think that people can see through them and can detect things about themselves that they can't really detect. It's because they're thinking, oh, I know this about myself. They must also. Any questions about this? Yes? So they didn't. They were total strangers. They were students like in a psychology class, not unlike this setting, who were just kind of thrown into a room together. But it's a good question. Like, would it be dissipated? Would people actually be able to see through you more if they were friends of yours or knew you? I bet they would. And I bet, indeed, this 26% number would go up, right? But I also bet that this one would go up as well. That your guess of how well they know you might go up. And who knows? Maybe this one would go up even more, than the 26%. And it's an open research question and a good one. Okay. So that's one enemy of Carpe Diem. We are excessively, we believe ourselves to be transparent to others. And we think that people can see our motivations and our emotions more than is actually the case. Okay, here's another one. This is a very related concept, but it's not actually exactly the same thing. A lot of people think this is the same one. It's not. Okay, so people tend to overestimate, the concept is the spotlight effect. And the spotlight effect is the tendency to overestimate the extent to which our actions and appearances are noticed by others. And this one should be very familiar to many of you, right? I mean, I feel like this one haunts me in my everyday life. I feel like people are looking at me when they're not looking at me. Well, obviously, this is a bad example. But in general, I totally overestimate the extent to which people are looking at me. You wake up, you got a really bad hair day, you're walking around, and you think everyone is mocking and sneering at you, sending texts to their friends, taking pictures of you, and they are, that's true, but you're overestimating how much they are. No, there's a strong tendency to overestimate how much other people are looking at us. People are not looking at us all the time. Gilovich and colleagues did some great research on this in 2000. And so I love these studies they did. In the first study, they had like 4 or 5 people go into a room, a lot like the lie, truth-telling study. 4 or 5 people from a class like this go into a room, and on their way in, they stopped one of them, and they'd say, hey, really quick, do you mind putting on this Barry Manilow T-shirt? We're just going to put on this Barry Manilow T-shirt on you. And for some reason, and you would offer some greater insight on this, they all said, okay, sure, I'll do that. I don't know why you would agree to do that, but literally everyone agreed to the Barry Manilow T-shirt. So they put on the Barry Manilow T-shirt. They're really embarrassed because Barry Manilow is a very embarrassing sort of lounge singery character from the 70s who most of your parents, your mothers perhaps were in love with, I don't know, or your fathers, whatever. And they're wearing the Barry Manilow T-shirt, and they're in this group discussion, and then they survey people, everybody afterwards, what T-shirts were people wearing, and did you see what was on participant 5's, T-shirt? And as it turns out, a pretty low percentage of people notice that it's a Barry Manilow T-shirt, that the guy's wearing a Barry Manilow T-shirt, or the woman. But people think everybody noticed, right? They're like, oh my God, I'm so sure that everyone saw me wearing this incredibly embarrassing Barry Manilow T-shirt. And they radically overestimate the extent to which people did notice. They overestimate how much people were watching them and picking up on these little characteristics about their self-presentation. So then they were like, so this was clearly like Tom Gilovich's idea to make everybody, Tom's, like a middle-aged guy. Barry Manilow is the like prototypical embarrassing singer from his generation to root for, to wear a T-shirt for, to be a fan of. And then his graduate students were like, no, it may just be people don't even know who Barry Manilow is, These kids, they don't know about Barry Manilow anymore, which is, just as well. And so they ran a second study, a replication, where they had a Vanilla Ice T-shirt. And I've seen this T-shirt because I went to Cornell, and it's ridiculous. It was like, for one, it's gratuitously oversized. It was like a double extra large. And then it had these giant yellow letterings that said Ice, Ice, Baby vertically. And then it was like dripping or something with some kind of, it was like a yellow dripping. It didn't look good. It didn't look good. So, of course, everybody goes, oh, my God, everybody's going to notice I'm wearing this incredibly embarrassing Vanilla Ice T-shirt. And then people really don't notice at a very high rate. 10, 20% of people notice or something, but people radically overestimate the extent of this effect. And again, they explain this with an anchor and adjustment explanation, right? They say, look, you know what you're wearing, so you anchor on that everybody must know what I know. And then you go, oh, wait, they have a different perspective. Maybe they don't know everything I know. Oh, maybe they didn't even notice. Maybe they're looking at everybody else's T-shirts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you insufficiently adjust for other people's perspective. So you anchor on your own perception of yourself and then take into account other people's. And anchorage adjustment is especially bad for like emotionally valenced, strong emotional sentiments like great embarrassment. If you say, wow, everybody can see I have this t-shirt, and boy, is it embarrassing, that'll be this very strong anchor, which your brain will very effortfully pull towards a more realistic impression of the situation and how much people are actually watching you. Do people understand this anchor and adjustment concept? Any questions? Okay. Yes. I don't think they did measure I don't remember if they measured the amount of embarrassment, but they reasoned that anchor and adjustment was a stronger effect here because of this high emotional valence of the anchor. But the way they did the data analysis was they just asked you, how many people do you think noticed, what t-shirt you had on, and then they asked everybody, how many of you noticed what t-shirt the person had on. I mean, that's one of the nice things about these studies is they reveal these very fundamental observations about everyday life. People can't see your internal states. They're not watching you all the time. But they're really simple. The designs of the studies are really, really simple. They're just us misperceiving how other people see us. Okay. This one's really good. I like this one a lot. This is a very, very related idea. Expectations of overly harsh criticism. We tend to overestimate how harshly other people will judge us for our blunders, mishaps, and failures. We tend to think that if we do something silly in public, everybody's going to notice, and everybody, spotlight effect, and then everybody's going to judge us very harshly. And then Gilovich, in some research with Ken Savitsky in 2001, decided to systematically study this effect. And basically what he did was he set up a bunch of situations where people would have to essentially embarrass themselves in front of other people and then estimate how harshly do these people judge you, and then how harshly do you think they're going to judge you. Exact same design, right? Exact same design as the truth lie-telling game or the spotlight effect game or experiment or whatever. So my favorite one of these studies was study 4. In study 4, they're doing an introduction study where you're asked a bunch of questions, and you're told, you're on a computer interface, and you're told it's networked with like 3 or 4 other people. And it actually is networked with like 3 or 4 other people. And they ask you a ton of questions about your personal life, like 50 or 60 questions or something. And what they tell you is that there's going to be a computer-generated introduction of you to the other people that are participating in the study based on your answers to the questions. So you answer all these questions, and you're like, okay, all right, they're going to make some introduction of me to these other people. And they sneak in there a question that's like, have you ever at any point in your life wet the bed? Did you ever do that? Did you ever just wet the bed? Just for fun, just for kids. And no, they didn't ask it that way. But anyway, so they sneak that question in there. Did you ever wet the bed? And then you're like, all right, maybe I was a little kid. Yeah, sure. Okay, maybe once or twice. And then the resulting computerized introduction goes out to all of the participants in the study, and it says, although participant A is not without fault, occasionally having some difficulties with bedwetting, she or he has continued to excel as a student at Cornell and considers him or herself to be a friendly, outgoing, and caring person. So you can imagine your reaction if this introduction went out of you, right? You'd be like, this is not fair. You'd be getting up and contacting the experimenter. You'd be like, this is ridiculous. I meant when I was a little child, I don't struggle with bedwetting anymore, And people got very worked up in this study. They were very, very upset for very obvious reasons. I would be very upset as well. And then they studied, they had people rate, their impressions of these people and rate them on a bunch of things like how much you respect the person, how much do you like them, how sympathetic a person is this. And they actually have these people who got the introduction rate you, even though they got this false introduction. And they don't rate you down that much. They kind of say, he or she has problems with bedwetting, there's worse things in the world. But then, of course, the participants in the study themselves tended to way overestimate how harshly they'd be evaluated by these other people. They were like, oh, these people probably think I'm a total jerk, and they're probably making fun of me in their cubicles right now. And they weren't really. People were actually more compassionate than that. So people tend to overestimate how harshly they were judged for this bedwetting thing. Okay, and then they wanted to identify what's the mechanism here. And it's Tom Gilovich. He's always looking for this kind of cognitive heuristic mechanism that drives these sorts of effects in everyday life. And so they found in their research that it was focalism, that you tend to just focus on that mishap. You tend to focus on the bedwetting information, and you don't pay any attention. If you're the subject in this study, the one that's being introduced as a bedwetter, you forget about all these other, this is just an excerpt from the introduction. There's other stuff in the introduction as well. And there's like 10 bits of information about yourself in the full introduction. You're friendly, you're outgoing, you're caring, but then there's also some stuff that indicates you're probably modest as well. So you know, like you're introduced to somebody with like 10 good traits, and then one, you're a bedwetter, you know? And what do? You think, oh my God, they're going to just judge me on this bedwetting thing. I've been found out. And in actuality, people read, you know, the 10 or so things, and they attach some significance to the bedwetting thing, but not nearly as much as you think they will. Any questions about that? Yes?
Weren't they identified, I mean, didn't they relate to that because they answered that question themselves?
Right. That's a good question. Like, I don't remember whether, I think everybody answered the same survey, but it would be interesting. I don't know if everybody did answer the same survey. Like maybe, yeah, maybe they were especially, the question is, maybe they were especially understanding because they had just answered that question and they had probably just said, yes, I used to wet the bed now and again. I don't really know. I think that's a really good question. Yeah. So wouldn't that drive down the effect, though? You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's an especially, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, it would help them get their effect. Yeah, I think it's a good point. Okay. Some other research by Tom Gilovich on Carpe Diem. Actions versus inactions. Gilovich and Medvec have done some research on whether on what you regret most in life. You know, and when it comes to the end of the day, when you get to the end, what are you going to regret? Are you going to regret the things you did that went wrong, or the things that you didn't do that you don't even know how they went? And what they find in this research is that immediately after an event, an action or an inaction, some decision you make to behave or not behave, you tend to regret your actions more than your inactions. You know, you do something, it goes wrong, it's embarrassing, you struggle with that, you know, it's frustrating, you know, whatever. You tend to not regret your inactions so much at that time, right? Because you're kind of doing gazillions and gazillions of inactions all the time. So right after you don't do something, it's hard to have a lot of regrets for that because you're going to continue not doing it in the next minute, the next minute, the next minute. So it just doesn't have the salience. There isn't a moment where you can feel regret for inactions. However, longer term, people tend to regret the things that they didn't do, not the things that they did. So, you know, when you look back at your life, you're going to regret, you know, not having gone on that vacation and instead, you know, buying that piece of furniture or not kissing that boy or that girl or something. You know, not applying for that job or applying to that graduate school. That's what you're going to regret, is the things you didn't do, not the things you did that went badly. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this might be the case, and one of them is the affective immune system, which we've talked about in the immune neglect lecture just a couple lectures ago. And in the immune neglect lecture, we found that people are pretty good at getting over things when they can make a story or a narrative or understand them. You're pretty good at returning to your kind of set point of happiness or unhappiness. And so the immune system works really well with stuff that's happened, that maybe went badly, but you can understand it, right? You can wrap some kind of meaning around it and get back to your base level of happiness. It doesn't work very well for things that didn't even happen, right? How are you supposed to get over an inaction? An inaction generates counterfactuals. Counterfactual is a fancy psychology word for what ifs. You know, what if I had, you know, kissed that girl, or what if I had gone on that vacation, or what if I had applied to and got into that graduate school? Maybe your life would have gone this whole other way that you'll never even know about, you know? And you might, you know, you'll regret it, but you can't get over it because you don't even know what would have gone down that path. So it's harder to get over the things that you never do. So if you do something that winds up bad, you get over it surprisingly well, but you can't get over things that you don't do. So when it comes to the end, you're going to regret the things you didn't do, not the things you did. So all things being equal, you should err on the side of action, and you should do things and not do things. Okay. Some other research that's relevant here by this joker. So when I was in graduate school, I got interested in doing research on the relationship between success and failure. And I had this idea that people tend to fear failure excessively, and their fear of failure stops them from trying, and then ironically that stops them from succeeding. And that maybe the reason that people do this is because they have a false theory in their heads that winning and losing are negatively related. Now, what does that mean, negatively related? Well, it's a statistical term for two things that vary, you know, in negative relationship to each other. I just used the word in the definition. I just did that. Okay. That when one goes up, the other goes down. When the other goes down, the other one goes up. People tend to think the more you win, the less you lose. And the less you win, the more you lose. They think in terms of winning percentage or batting average. So we tend to think, you know, the people who are more successful, well, they never fail. They fail less. And the people who are less successful, they fail all the time. And so when people start failing, they go, oh, I'm one of those failing kind of people. I need to stop trying because all this failing is getting me down. But in many domains, those who lose the most are also the people who win the most. And I did a bunch of research showing or finding that this is true for like college applications. We tend to think that the people who got into the most schools get rejected by very few. Actually, the people who get into the most schools for undergrad or for grad school are people who applied the most. They're the ones that also got rejected by the most schools. And if you do a study, you'll find those people who got accepted by 6 schools, they got rejected by 6 schools as well. They didn't get rejected by 0 schools. It tends to be the case. And I was one of those people. I have only applied in undergrad to like 2 schools, got accepted by 1, got rejected by 1. What if I'd applied to 6 schools, or 12? Maybe I would have had more options. I would have had more choices, and it would have been maybe more successful. It's also the case for paper submissions to journals and scholarship applications and things like that. Anything where opportunity is in your hands, where you can control how much you try, how hard you try, that means that winning and losing are probably going to be positively related. As one goes up, the other goes up as well. So the takeaway from this is that you have to lose to win, and that the real determinant of winning is how much you try. And you're not going to be able to win, you're not going to be able to succeed unless you can develop thick skin about losing, about failure and rejection. Until you toughen up about that, you're not going to be able to try enough to succeed as much as you should. And so the weird takeaway from this research is that losing is a symptom of trying, and trying is how you succeed. And so in a weird way, losing is a symptom of winning. Because if you're going to win a lot, you're going to have to lose a lot as well. And that's how you should digest and understand your failures and your losses is, oh yeah, I forgot. This is just something that happens along with the wins and the successes and the victories. The thing you should be most scared about is never failing, because it probably meant you never tried, and it probably means you won't succeed. Does this make sense? It's a strange idea, but I think it's true. And I was just futzing around last night watching the Lakers game, and then I decided to look this up. The top 4 people in missed field goal attempts this year in the NBA, the people who missed the most shots in the NBA, were, not exactly the worst players in the NBA, right? They're like Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Dirk Nowitzki, who doesn't get much respect and deserves more. That's for you, Jeff. Come on. LeBron. So these are pretty decent players, right? They also happen to be the top 4 scorers in the NBA. So what does this tell you? If you want to succeed, if you want to score, then you need you got to take a lot of shot attempts. And these, let's see here, LeBron was number 1 in the MVP voting, Kobe was number 2, and Dwayne Wade was number 3. Dwayne Wade should have been number 2, in my opinion. Okay, so some conclusions. So for a variety of reasons, you should do the things that you want to do and not let self-consciousness hold you back. There's a bunch of takeaways from these individual studies we just talked about. People can't see what you're really thinking. Your fears, your nervousness, your concerns, the things that haunt you, and so on. People can't see them. And so you need not assume in social settings that they can. Also, people are not watching you that closely. You're thinking about, maybe I should, cut loose and dance like a friggin' moron in this club tonight. Yeah, you should do that. You should do that. And you're thinking, oh, I'm going to get noticed. People are going to be judging me. They're going to think I'm an idiot. But they're not. They're not watching you that closely. They're not going to notice, and they're certainly not going to remember tomorrow. For a variety of reasons. But also, even if people were watching you that closely, they simply won't judge you that harshly for your missteps, your mistakes, your foibles. I mean, you may even construe things to be mistakes and missteps that they don't even think are mistakes. They don't even assign that kind of signature to it. They just don't see it that way. And then furthermore, another reason you need to go out and try is that you're more likely to regret not doing the things that you want to do than doing them and having something not go exactly the way you want it to. At the end of the day, you're going to regret your inactions, not your actions. So you should side on the side of action. And then furthermore, people who fail more also succeed more. So even if you go out and try and you find yourself failing, you should actually construe that as a sign of future success or past success, because people who fail more are the people who try more, and people who try more succeed more. So in life, really, the thing you need to fear is your regrets. Regrets for the things you didn't do, the times you didn't try. That's what you need to be worried about, not failure. Failure is a symptom of winning. Regrets, now that's something that should bother you. Okay, so to wrap up the Carpe Diem thing, some Carpe Diem related quotes. I love Carpe Diem related quotes. Here's one from the Bible, Ecclesiastes. A man hath no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be merry, for that shall abide with him of his labor the days of his life, which God giveth him under the sun. This is often condensed to a shorter quote. Does anybody know what it is? Right. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Which is a funny thing to find in the Bible, right? It's a little strange. Okay. And then Dylan Thomas, a great prophet of Carpe Diem. He said, among other things, break in the sun till the sun breaks down. He also has a great poem, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, which is essentially about fighting against death. Ironically, Dylan Thomas died at, I think, like age 39 or so, and his last words were, I've just had 18 whiskeys. I think that's some kind of record. So I don't know if that's like a pro or anti-Carpe Diem statement, but you construe it as you will. Show more moderation than Sir Thomas. All right. And then the great all-time prophet of Carpe Diem is an old Persian poet and actually also mathematician named Omar Khayyam. He's a great mathematician. He's also a physicist. People think that maybe he conjectured that the heliocentric model of the solar system 300, 400 years before Nikolai Copernicus did. Omar Khayyam, total badass. His poems were translated in, I think, the 18th century by British poet Edward Fitzgerald and then put into a compendium called the Rubaiyat, which I highly encourage you to go check out. It's really good. It's filled with just lots of little things like this. So 2 Omar Khayyam quotes about Carpe Diem. Be happy for this moment. This moment is your life. And a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and thou beside me, singing in the wilderness. Okay, so that's the Carpe Diem lecture. And we will turn to okay. Okay, so, all right, we're running on time. This is good. So I challenged you at the beginning of the semester to maybe take this class or maybe not take this class. And to take this class, if you wanted to confront a lot of big fundamental questions about human behavior, human existence, relationships, happiness, and so on. And the reason I did that is because I think social psychology really asks these big questions, the big ones, you know? What are some of these questions? What are these questions? Who am I? How can I be happy? How can I be a righteous person? How can I do right by the people around me? How can I build and sustain good relationships with others? How can I know if I've fallen in love? You know, things like that. The big questions, the big ones. And when you're a kid, when you're going through adolescence, or when you're kind of leaving being a kid, when you're like 13 or 14, you start asking these big questions, right? It's this time when you're suddenly like plunged into adulthood. You find yourself like, you know, physically about the size you'll be when you're an adult. You start having more complex emotions. You start asking these big questions, you know? Who am I? How am I going to fall in love? How can I be a righteous person? All these sort of meaning of life type questions. And then if you're anything like I was, when you get to college, you're starting to stop asking those questions. You're leaving adolescence and entering a more kind of traditional conception of adulthood. Or maybe you've even already left it. And adulthood is typified by, among other things, tending to not ask these questions and even to make fun of people who do. I think people tend to get maybe half answers to these questions or no answers at all, and they just kind of move on. They say, look, these questions are unknowable, I can't know, and why is it worth my time to even ask these questions? And then the worst thing is then they go and they make fun of the people who are still asking them. And when I went to college, I had a long journey when I went to college, but when I eventually found social psychology, I found this area where they were asking and trying to offer some sort of answer to these questions. In the same way that the poetry that I'd read or the books I'd read or the movies I'd gotten into had done. And I got into those when I was an adolescent. And then when I went to college, I got into this stuff as maybe a scientific way to get some answers to these questions. And I think that that's what's great about this area. And if there's one thing I could turn you on to, it's maybe wait just a little bit longer before you stop asking those questions, you know? Maybe just prolong that uncertainty a little longer before you close it up. And hopefully in this class, one thing you might do is take the tools, take the insights, the themes, the ideas from the class, and take them and rip your brain wide open and look at it closely and sort of decide how you want to put it back together. So the beginning question at the beginning of this class was, should you live the examined life? And here are some quotes about that. Shakespeare, this above all else, to thine own self be true. Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. And this is actually one that I like a lot from Hermann Hesse in the novel Damien. I wanted only to try to live in accord with the promptings which came from my true self. Why was that so very difficult? Well, it is really difficult, right? It's hard to figure out who you are and where you're going in life. And I would hope that this class would offer some sort of way station where you could kind of stop and reflect, get some tools for that reflection, examine yourself closely, and try and get some answers. So, why should you live an examined life? Well, one thing is knowledge is its own reward. I would argue that this is sort of implicit in your decision to go to college. I mean, who knows why you went to college? Maybe you went to college because of parental Familial expectations. That's probably why I went to college. That and the fact that I could go to college. Maybe you went to college to better yourself, get a better job or something like that, do better socioeconomically. And these are really good reasons to go to college. But a lot of us go to college, or something we find when we get to college is there's a lot of knowledge here, right? You can get a little bit closer to the truth if you go to college. You can learn a lot. And if you went to college, a tacit, implicit thing in that decision was that you wanted to live the examined life and that you felt that knowledge was, to a certain extent, its own reward. Knowledge is practical, and it's valuable for what it can get you, but to some extent, the knowledge is just worthwhile on its own. Also, this knowledge in social psychology, this knowledge about your place in the world, these kind of big questions, understanding these things can help you deal with them. It can help you live a better life. It has actual practical value. Because the life of illusion is its own punishment. All those people who didn't take this class, oh man, they're crying now. Whew, they don't even know what they missed. Just kidding, I don't know. Okay, but living the life of delusion, living the life of illusion, not trying to enlighten yourself about the true nature of the world, is its own punishment, because delusions are challenged regularly by the events of the world. And this leads to disappointment, insecurity, defensiveness, anger, selfishness, and most of all, new delusions. Think about when prophecy fails. What happened when their delusions were challenged by events of the world? What did they do? They just made up new ones. And really, you should come to college to destroy that, right? And start building up a framework of truth in the way you see the world. That should be what you want to do, right? Nonetheless, most people live a life of falsehood and illusion, but living in reality can help you overcome prejudice, it can limit your conflicts with others, it can reduce your pride and lead to stronger relationships, and it can make you happier as well, I think. Okay, so some final thoughts. It's very serious now, very serious. So what do we learn in this class? Are there some basic principles in life, for life in these materials? Okay, self-serving biases. We tend to think that we are above average, right in our arguments, justified in our actions. We exhibit motivated reasoning, the above average effect. We do all those things, and yet we should check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. Ice Cube is a great social psychologist. But we don't want to go so far either. We need to be humble. We need to be modest. It doesn't do us any good to think of ourselves as better than the people around us. It only creates separation between ourselves and others, and the real way to happiness is by connecting with others socially. But you can't go too far the other way. Don't be too modest. Don't be too humble. Don't fall into the imposter phenomenon. Don't believe that you're unqualified to be here or really unqualified to be anywhere you are. Do see yourself accurately and then respect what you see. I mean, you're all incredibly successful people. You're at this amazing university. You're well beyond anywhere I could have been or anywhere I was at your age. You need to appreciate that and see yourself accurately and respect that. So chin up, shoulders back. Good lesson for life. Good and evil behavior. We got a lot of insights on this. We went off on this for like a long time, right? The capacity for evil adheres in situations more than in individuals. Remember the Milgram experiment? Remember the Zimbardo experiment? Remember that in the Milgram experiment, if you wanted to know if somebody was going to kill somebody, what would you want to know? The situation they were in or the kind of person they were? The situation they were in. It's a condition that they could design that would lead 90+% of people to kill the person. And there's a condition that they could design that led 10% or so of people to kill people. That means that who the people were didn't matter that much. It was the situation that was designed around them. And the situation is what made them kill. So don't be so judgmental of others for killing people and stuff. Just kidding. Okay. Be judgmental of others for killing people. But don't be so judgmental of others until you take proper account of the situations they're in. Because being judgmental before you've really taken somebody's perspective only separates you from them and makes it impossible for you to understand them. But then likewise, hold yourself to a higher standard. Be vigilant of your own behavior and be aware of situational constraints that might impinge upon your decision making and make you do things that you wouldn't want to do. The situation is no excuse for you because you've taken social psychology. You know it all now. You know it all. Okay. Also, people tend not to intervene in emergencies. But if you could overcome this could be heroic. Conformity. Doing what everybody else does can often lead you to do bad things, and it will always lead you to do very boring things. So don't be afraid to be different, and a little breach now and again is healthy. And remember this Thoreau quote. It's a terrific quote, best quote from the class. The greater part of what my neighbors call good, I believe in my soul to be bad, and if I repent of anything, it is very likely to be my good behavior. What demon possessed me that I behave so well? Conflict. Interpersonal conflicts come from not understanding other people's perspectives. This is, again, kind of the same lesson about how the power of the situation creates bad, immoral, evil behavior more than personalities do. Well, it's the case that conflicts, they feast, they run on lack of understanding and failing to take other people's perspectives. Remember the conflict essay exercise and how a simple essay exercise could lead you to take the perspective of the other person and really understand them. And if you're anything like me, when you did the conflict or the perspective-taking conflict exercise, you found that you might have even have been wrong, you know? And certainly, if you really take it seriously, you know that there have been some situations where you were wrong in these arguments. You have to try to take the role of the other. It does not happen naturally. You have to really try to do it. It is effortful, and even if you try, you probably won't do it sufficiently, and remember that. Intergroup conflicts can arise with little basis, and they can lead to dehumanization of the other group, just like the robber's cave experiment. So try to see commonalities with the other group, and invoke an overarching identity, but note that Stanford does still suck. Okay, stereotypes. People tend to stereotype other people outside of awareness. So you will be doing this in the course of everyday perception without knowing it. So you need to scrutinize your judgments of others in social settings. Are you being fair? Are you putting weight on the right data? And if you find yourself saying, I don't know what it is about that person, they just don't seem right for this job, or I don't know what it is about that person, I just don't really like them, well, scrutinize that. What is that thing you can't put your finger on? What is it? Are you being fair? And, especially be wary of snap judgments, angry judgments. These are moments when you're non-conscious, your automatic stereotypic activation will tend to override the thoughts you would probably prefer to have, the more carefully reasoned thoughts. Also, remember that privilege is invisible to those who have it. So as you look around and make judgments about other people and how far they've gone in life, remember the people who helped you out, and the number of people in the world who would change situations with you in a second. Remember everything that you have. And even if you had to work your way up from nothing to get here. You know, even if you're the first person in your family to go to college, that's something to be proud of, but it's not a basis to look down on other people. And there are privileges that we have right now in this room, you know, for being able to be at this university, and we need to be aware of that. So we need to be realistic about the advantages of that. Okay, lower status people. They tend to have less influence in groups and less chance to talk. So let women and minorities speak. Also, create participation systems. You will be setting up situations. You will be having power over situations, which will in turn have power over you and others. As you set up those situations, try and create structures of interaction that will allow people to participate in an inclusive way. You know, if you're running a meeting, maybe have everybody in the room have to say something. That way you're sure that you won't overlook somebody and they won't not even have a chance to say anything. There are productive things that you can do to counteract these biases now that you know about them. And in a way, it's sort of your responsibility, right? Because you have this knowledge. Status is a double-edged sword, though. It not only is a basis of discrimination, but it's also one of the bases of social order. And status for generosity or a job well done actually keeps groups together. So don't be reluctant to give respect for these things, give people their just desserts, and so on. So, yes, right. Don't be afraid to give credit. Big decisions, maybe sleep on them for a little while. Your non-conscious will think it out. You might make a better decision. On a test, don't guess, but were you to guess? Trust your later instincts. Okay. Immune neglect. We tend to get over things emotionally when we understand them. So, preserve the mystery in the good things, right? This is something I didn't emphasize probably enough in the immune neglect lecture. You need to preserve the mystery in the good things. Don't try so hard to even understand the sources of the good things, except in as much as it helps you get more of them. But preserve the mystery in the good things, but make a story to help you understand the bad things. Because if you can create that story and that narrative, then it'll facilitate the healing process. And maybe redo the Pennebaker essay assignment from time to time, because research shows that it's extremely good for mental and physical well-being. Happiness. The keys to happiness are not obvious. They're not the things that you necessarily would think they would be. So what doesn't work? Well, most of the stuff the positive psychologists tell us about. The relentless pursuit of wealth, possessions, excessive rumination or fixation on things. These things make you unhappy or make you less happy than you could be. But enduring sources of happiness include good relationships, pro-social behavior, exercise, flow. I don't know why I capitalized that. I must have been feeling real flow at the time. Meditation, that will make you happy, not so much at the time as longer term. Do these things, and you will live a happier life. But the biggest way to live a happier life than you would live otherwise would be to sustain great relations with others, and to do that, show gratitude. Express to people your thankfulness for the things that they've given you and the ways they've supported you, and that will nurture those relationships. It will set your frame on those relationships correct. You'll think about what you owe to other people, the debts you owe, and not so much on what's owed to you, but it will also help you do right by these other people, and they'll treat you better as a result. Relationships. Remember, the big finding from relationships is, or the first big finding we talked about in the lecture is, love chooses you, not the other way around. It is not so much the case that you have some set of this checklist, all these preferences, and then you go out and you find the person that fits that. Instead, it's much more the other way around, that you will find yourself in love, and an awareness of that can help you live in concert with reality better. Also, avoid Jonathan Haidt's 2 pitfalls. Over-fixating on the highest highs of passion, running off to Vegas and getting married when you maybe wouldn't be advised to do so. But also undervaluing long-term companionship. That's something we tend to not do, especially when we're younger. Undervaluing long-term companionship can get in the way of you realizing which relationships are really the ones that will work longer term. And the longest-lasting relationships are those where people see each other accurately. That's the marriage shift, right? So if you can find one of those relationships where you see each other accurately and accept that and have good companionship, well, then maybe that is the one. Maybe that is the answer to that question. So be open-minded and accept you have some faults. And don't be afraid to let the other person know who you are. Because ultimately, if you want to get to where you want to get, or assuming you want some long-term partnership, it's going to involve showing somebody who you are and finding out if they'll accept that. Happiness and Carpe Diem. People aren't watching you closely, judging, silently judging. We tend to regret inactions more than we regret actions. So seize the day. Psychologically and socially, we are what we do. This is the cognitive dissonance principle, right? Thought tends to follow behavior. We become the way that we act. Remember that when people were compelled to tell a lie about an experiment for insufficient amount of money, they just decided that the lie was true, right? And so if you can make yourself act in some way, then you'll become that person. You want to stop being an alcoholic, stop drinking, you'll eventually stop wanting alcohol. You want to stop smoking, same thing. You want to be a fun person, go out and have fun, you'll become a fun person. You want to be extroverted, go to that party. Answer the phone. Don't do the opposite. Don't do whatever you've been doing. And Kurt Vonnegut has a great quote on this: be careful what you pretend to be, because you are what you pretend to be. He meant this socially, that the reality of who you are is a social individual, and it's what people perceive you to be. That's who you are. But it also works at a psychological level as well, that if you behave in some way, you'll become that person. And that's a way that probably Kurt didn't anticipate, but it's true as well. So to have that life that you want to have, you must behave as the person that you want to be. This is not easy. It's effortful. It's not easy to change the way you would normally behave, but it is the key. If you want to change who you're being, your enactment of self, the only way to do it effectively is through your behaviors. And then, fundamentally, I think the biggest idea in this class is that your life is a social life. The things that corrupt us, the things that make us evil, and in some cases the things that make us appear good, are generally social factors: the power of the situation, the influence of others. People cause most of the terrible things that happen in this world, and they also make most of the great things. And when they make the terrible things happen, it's often as a result of the situations they find themselves in, not the personality that they believe drove them to that. And getting over terrible things can itself be a social process. Remember that the immune neglect process can be triggered by talking with other people, talking with a counselor, filling out an essay that'll be read by some reader, talking with a friend. That's the way you get over things, and it's a social process. It's all of it social. Other people determine much of our behavior. The power of the situation. Social factors do more in everyday life than does personality. And the keys to happiness, they lie between people more than within them, right? I used to have this theory when I was younger that you could maybe just decide to be somebody else one day. You could just wake up and say, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to do the things I want to do, and you could just decide that. And then just one day it would all be better. I had this idea. It's a really, really stupid idea. And since I got into social psychology, I realized it's all the other way around. That change, if you want to change yourself, you have to do it with effort, and you have to do it day by day. You have to enact the person that you really want to be. You can't just decide to be the person you want to be. And you can't just wake up and decide you're going to be happy. You have to behave in a way that would make you happy. You have to sustain good relationships with others and exhibit pro-social behavior. These are the two biggest ingredients, I think, if you want to live a happy, purposeful, meaningful life. Create and sustain great relationships with others and exhibit pro-social behavior. Help people, do right by the other people in your life. So do right by the society you find yourself in, the people that you find yourself with. Your life is a social life, and the keys to getting the things that you want are social keys. If you don't do right by other people, you won't be able to achieve happiness. You won't be able to sustain relationships. But if you can, then the world is wide open to you. And this idea that your goals and the means to get to them are essentially social in nature, that was the idea of this class. That was what this class was about. So that's it. That's the end of the lecture. That's the end of the class, actually. All right. Okay, so now we'll take like a few minute break, and then we'll do the exam review session. We'll pass out review sheets, perhaps redundantly because you already have them, but so be it. And then we'll do evaluations after that. So hang around for 30 more minutes. Okay. If I get your attention, we'll get started. If I get your attention, we'll get going with the review for the exam. One thing I do want to do before we move on to the exam is anybody here graduating by any chance? Is anybody? Okay, now, if you could please all stand up so that we can, yes, I know all of you just had your hands up, so you'll have to stand up. We want you to know we're really proud of you. Well done. All of you, stand up, all you seniors. Nice work. Nice work. I'm sure you will represent us beautifully in the real world, wherever that is. Okay, so questions about the final. Yes, sir. Yes, flow. That's a concept from the happiness lecture. It also came up in Jonathan Haidt's happiness hypothesis. Flow is an idea of qkyx27ixBkI. Is that not? That's very similar to the way Jonathan Haidt says. Okay, all right. Nora actually knows him, so she would know better than me. Okay, so here is flow. Flow is explained here. It's the experience you have when you're totally immersed in a task that is challenging and stimulating, but well suited to your abilities. You tend to go in the zone. Think about like whenever you do anything athletic, for example. You're in the zone because you're such an athlete. Sir, yes?
Could you please remind us of Eastwick and Finkel?
Yes, Eastwick and Finkel is a paper that we talked about in the relationships lecture, and it is basically the paper that says you don't know what you want. That one of the many papers from the class about how you don't have any idea. You don't know what you want. Your mate preferences don't predict the people you actually wind up with. But, right, no, that's basically it. Yeah, but nonetheless, people do fall in love. Love chooses them, not the other way around. More questions? Yes? That's an excellent question. Okay, so I would say for that, yeah, it can be in the assigned readings. Don't pick, I actually lost who asked me this question. Thank you. Okay, I thought it was, okay. Sorry. Don't pick like a really small random experiment from one of the books. That would be the only restriction. Yeah. One of these essay questions is prompts for long answer. Number 1 is identify your favorite study from the last third of the class, explain the methods of the study in detail, explain the results thoroughly, and explain the implications of the study. What if you didn't have a favorite study from last third of class? Pretend that you did. Pretend. Your least favorite study from the last third of class. And yeah, just don't pick something really obscure from one of the books that probably wasn't like explained in much detail. That'd be the only way to go wrong there. Otherwise, everything's game. Yes? Yes. Well, the questions, the multiple choice questions, that tends to be where the reading questions get really, really specific. They will be equally specific as before. And they're essentially designed to where if you read it, you'll get them right. If you didn't, you won't. Yeah. So read it. You'll get it right. You have 48 hours. Yeah. Sure. The thin slices experimental paradigm came from the automaticity lecture, the first automaticity 1 and 2. I don't know why I called it that, but I did. And the thin slices experimental paradigm is explained here on like this page. Yeah. And in the thin slices experimental paradigm, people are shown the personality characteristics, they're asked to judge personality characteristics of others from just thin slices of information. So they're given only thin slice, like a silent videotape, for some period of time, 10, 15 seconds, something like that, and asked to guess, how altruistic is the person, or how extroverted, or what's their IQ, or what have you. and people are surprisingly good at making those judgments from even thin slices. I again lost who this person is. I gotta tell you, I am so exhausted. I'm just like a mess today. So, like I'm seeing, I feel like I'm on, well, whatever. I'm not finishing that sentence. I'm going to show prudence for the first time this semester and not finish that sentence. Okay. All right. There you are. And sure. You're welcome. All right. Let's pack in these questions because we're going to run out of time in about 5 minutes. We'll be done with the thing. So I'm going to start answering them really quickly. Yes. Oh, yeah. Implicit. Can I explain implicit egotism? I certainly can. Implicit egotism is a concept from the automaticity miscellaneous series of lectures, and implicit egotism is the underlying mechanism that drives the why Susie sells seashells from the seashore effect. That wasn't easy. And the why Susie sells seashells at the seashore effect, by the seashore, or whatever, is basically that people tend to move to places or take jobs that resemble their names. And the reason that they think that this is implicit egotism, that people have generally positive impressions of themselves. Is there any problem? We good? Okay, great. Okay. There's a question over here. Yes, ma'am. Nonverbal complementarity. That comes from the automaticity mimicry lecture, which is here. And it's actually the opposite of mimicry. It's complementarity. And people tend to, with dominance or hierarchy-related nonverbal behaviors, they tend towards complementarity. So, for example, in the Tiedens and Fergal 2003 research, there was this tendency for people who had adopted expansive body postures for the people that worked with them to have constricted ones and vice versa. But when you adopt a constricted body posture, the person you're with tends to expand. Yes, yes. The imposter phenomenon, that came from the happiness, right? Yeah, happiness lecture. And it is the tendency of successful people, feeling among successful individuals that they do not belong in elite academic or professional settings and are just waiting to be found out. It's a common feeling amongst women and minorities that they don't belong in these elite educational settings, and they're wrong. There was a question there. The police officer's dilemma is from automaticity, one of the automaticity. No, it's from stereotypes. Okay. Police officer's dilemma is some research by Joshua Carell and colleagues that was covered in the stereotypes lecture, which shows that, among other things, one reason, perhaps, why African Americans in this country are disproportionately victims of accidental police shootings, one reason maybe they're not so accidental, but another reason is stereotypic associations of African Americans as hostile and threatening lead people to believe, or lead policemen to police people to conclude that maybe they have guns or weapons or are going to attack them or something like that. I don't even know where this question came from. It was you, maybe. Somebody. Yes. The first instinct fallacy, that came from automaticity miscellaneous lecture. Oh, dear. Let's do that. Which is this? No, it's this. No, it was that one. Okay. Automaticity miscellaneous had the first instinct fallacy. This is some research by, I think, Kruger. And you're also supposed to read an article on it. And it's the idea that people think you're supposed to go with your first instinct on multiple choice tests, but actually you should go with your later instincts. Okay, I'm going to keep answering questions, but this time we'll start handing out the two evaluation forms that you'll fill out. So one is and pencils, yeah. So one is a multiple choice. If I can keep your attention, because I want you to understand the evaluations thing, and I want to still answer some questions before you start. So don't start filling this thing out until we finish, okay? So there's two forms. One is the bubble form Scantron thing, and we'll pass out pencils if you need them, so you can fill that in. And then there's a second form, which is for me, which is like qualitative data, where it asks you, what's your favorite thing in the class? What's your least favorite thing in the class? This bubble thing is useful to me, but not nearly as useful as the free answer one. So if you could put even a sentence or two down, I would be very, very thankful to you. I would be very grateful. I would show you great gratitude. Because I can't really learn how to make the class better from just this class sucked or something like that. Even if that's how you felt, I want to hear from you, especially if you thought this class sucked. Tell me why. But please, God, do it nicely. I'm very sensitive. Yes, sir. I'm answering more. What is it? Oh, the main idea of Nisbet and Wilson. That is from the automaticity lecture. And Nisbet and Wilson, 1977, are the ones that keep saying over and over that people tell more than they can know when they report their the reasons for their behavior. So the main idea from Nisbet and Wilson is that people tend to overestimate the extent to which they can identify the causes and determinants of their behavior. Does that make sense? More questions? Yes, sir. Okay, if we could be quiet just a little bit longer while we're still handing these things out. Don't fill them out, and I can get a little bit more review in. How in depth should you know the Wilson book? Read the whole thing. You know, you gotta read the whole thing. I wouldn't read it twice, but I would read it at least once. I wouldn't like study chapter reviews or anything like that. But we asked a question on the quiz, I think. No, that was based on the Haidt book. What's the main idea of the stuff on happiness, and its happiness lies between, not within. That would be a typical kind of question on the Wilson book as well. Question here. Yes. Here. Okay. Question, whatever it is, just go ahead and ask it. Yes. The marriage shift. That is a concept from the relationships lecture from Thursday, and it is the idea that dating relationships, people tend to like people who see them positively, but then in married relationships, people tend to prefer people who see them realistically, if that makes sense. That there's some kind of shift that happens with marriage from preferring partners who see you like as amazing and perfect and all that, to preferring partners who see you as who you really are, realistically. And then we'll do one more question, then I should get out of here because some of you are already starting to fill this out. Well, we got 2 minutes. We'll say 2 minutes. You don't need more than 10 minutes to fill it out, right? So any questions? More questions? One last. Yes. Oh, athletic stereotypes about race, that one? Yeah, just review that slide and be familiar with some of the stereotypic ways in which people, whites and blacks, are portrayed in, sports writing with respect to race. Yeah. Questions? Yes. Yeah, okay, so insights. Okay, so that comes from the first automaticity lecture, which is here. And the dominant view of human nature is here. It's basically the Cartesian model of the human mind and how we supposedly think, but we don't really think this way, and so on. The idea that we are, it's actually, that we're rational and calculating and logical in our decision making and so on. Okay, I'm going to need to get out of here because you all are filling out the filling out the evaluations. It's been a terrific semester. I really could use your careful feedback on these things as much time as you're willing to put into them. I would really appreciate your feedback because I want to make the class better next time, and I need your help to do that. So, and I'll see you all on Thursday.